The steady hum of a woodworking planer had become Adrian Mercer's closest companion over the last 6 years. Every morning, sunlight filtered through the dusty windows of his modest workshop outside Austin, spilling across stacks of walnut, oak, and maple, the scent of freshly cut timber mixed with linseed oil, creating an atmosphere far more comforting than any luxury office could offer. Here no one cared that he had once been a respected architect. No one remembered the scandal that had shattered his career or the divorce that had torn apart his family. Inside these four walls, he was simply a craftsman who transformed rough lumber into beautiful furniture. Wood never lied. It revealed every flaw, every knot, and every hidden crack. If handled with patience, it rewarded honesty. Adrian appreciated that. Unlike people, timber never pretended to be something it wasn't. His rough hands guided a chisel across the armrest of a handcrafted rocking chair. Tiny curls of walnut drifted onto the floor as smooth curves slowly emerged beneath careful strokes. For the first time in decades, his life felt peaceful. Then his old flip phone vibrated violently across the workbench. The sudden sound shattered the silence. Adrian switched off the planer and waited as the ringing continued. Few people knew this number. Fewer still ever called. He wiped sawdust from his hands before lifting the phone. The screen displayed a name he never expected to see again. Damian Mercer, his son. 20 years had passed since they had spoken without anger. 20 birthdays, 20 Christmases, 20 Father's Days that arrived and disappeared without so much as a message. Every memory between them had hardened into silence. Adrian inhaled slowly before answering. "Hello," a polished voice responded immediately. "Adrian." Not Dad, never Dad, just Adrian. The single word carried the cold confidence of a successful businessman addressing someone beneath him. "Damian. Mother died last week." There was no emotion, no grief, no hesitation, only facts delivered with clinical precision. "A stroke." Adrian closed his eyes. Vivian Mercer, his former wife, the woman he had once loved enough to sacrifice everything for. Gone. The words refused to settle in his mind. She had always possessed unstoppable energy, endless ambition, and an iron will that bent everyone around her. Imagining her simply absent felt impossible. "I thought you should know," Damian continued. Adrian swallowed. "When was the funeral?" "It already happened." The answer landed like another blow. "You weren't invited." Silence stretched between them. Damian spoke again. "The lawyer requires your presence at the reading of the will this Friday in Manhattan." "I don't belong there." "You do. I have nothing to do with your mother's estate." Damian laughed. It wasn't amusement. It was contempt sharpened over 2 decades. "Believe me, you're not receiving anything." Adrian remained quiet. "The lawyer says it's legally necessary that you attend." "I see." "I'll be honest," Damian continued. "I'm looking forward to watching your face." Adrian frowned. "What do you mean?" "My mother spent 20 years building an empire. You spent 20 years hiding in a workshop pretending your life still mattered." Each sentence struck harder than the last. "When the will is read," Damian said, "everyone will hear exactly what she thought of you." His voice grew almost cheerful. "You'll finally receive official confirmation that you're worth absolutely nothing." Adrian's grip tightened around the phone. "I don't need confirmation." "Oh, I think you do." Another pause. "I especially want to watch your expression when the lawyer explains why you deserve nothing." Adrian stared across the workshop toward the half-finished rocking chair. The smooth wood suddenly seemed very far away. "You've waited 20 years for this?" he asked quietly. "I've waited longer." Damien's tone carried unmistakable satisfaction. You walked away from this family. Now you'll get to witness exactly how completely you've been erased from it. Adrian almost ended the call. Instead, he listened. Don't worry about the trip home, Damien added mockingly. I'll even give you $15 for bus fare. Think of it as charity. The line disconnected. Adrian lowered the phone slowly. The workshop fell silent once more. Yet the peace he had built there no longer existed. His son's cruelty hadn't surprised him. What surprised him was how deeply it still hurt. He crossed the room and rested one hand on the unfinished rocking chair. Years ago, anger would have driven him to shout. Now it settled quietly inside him like glowing embers beneath ash. He wasn't afraid of humiliation. He had survived far worse. Still, one question refused to leave his mind. Why would Vivian insist he attend? After 20 years of complete silence, why make him appear at the reading of her will? Nothing about it made sense. Adrian walked into the small bedroom attached to the workshop. At the back of his closet hung a garment bag covered in dust. He unzipped it carefully. Inside waited a charcoal gray suit he hadn't worn since the day his marriage officially ended. The fabric was outdated but perfectly preserved. He brushed away the dust and ran his fingers across the sleeve. So, he whispered to the empty room, this is how the past calls someone back. He carefully laid the suit across the bed. On Friday morning, he would board a flight to New York. Not because Damien demanded it, not because he expected money, but because unanswered questions had a strange way of following a man forever. And somewhere inside him he sensed that Vivian Mercer had left behind far more than an ordinary will. Friday morning greeted Adrian Mercer with gray skies hanging over Manhattan. The towering skyline looked nothing like the quiet Texas countryside he had called home for years. Glass skyscrapers stretched toward the clouds, reflecting wealth, ambition, and power. Every corner of the city reminded him of the world he had left behind. A taxi dropped him in front of Whitmore and Associates, one of the most prestigious law firms in New York. The building itself felt intimidating. Polished granite walls, enormous glass doors, and spotless marble floors projected authority before anyone even spoke. Adrian adjusted the collar of his old charcoal gray suit and stepped inside. The receptionist looked up briefly before offering a polite but distant smile. Good morning. May I help you? I'm here for the reading of Vivian Mercer's will. She typed his name into her computer. Mr. Adrian Mercer? Yes. They're expecting you. Please have a seat. He walked toward the waiting area, where expensive leather chairs surrounded a sleek glass table covered with financial magazines. Everything about the room screamed success. Everything reminded Adrian that he no longer belonged in this world. He quietly took a seat near the window. Only a few minutes passed before the elevator doors opened. Damien Mercer entered first. Confidence surrounded him like an expensive fragrance. His tailored navy suit fits perfectly. A platinum watch rested on his wrist, and polished Italian shoes barely made a sound against the marble floor. Walking beside him was Claire Bennett, an elegant woman whose beauty seemed carefully manufactured. Every detail, from her designer handbag to her flawless makeup, looked calculated. Behind them followed Victor Sloan, Damien's financial advisor. Victor wore a smile that looked practiced rather than sincere. The three of them appeared less like grieving relatives and more like investors arriving to finalize a profitable business deal. Damien noticed Adrian immediately. A slow grin spread across his face. Well, he said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear, you actually came. Adrian simply nodded. I wasn't sure $15 would cover the trip. Claire laughed softly. Victor smirked. Neither offered a greeting. Damien walked closer, studying Adrian's outdated suit. You still have this thing? He chuckled. I remember that suit. Adrian remained silent. You wore it during the divorce. The words hung heavily in the air. Claire folded her arms. I honestly thought he'd be different. Victor whispered just loudly enough for Adrian to hear. I expected someone with at least a little dignity. Damien laughed. This is my father. He pronounced the final word as though apologizing for it. Claire offered an awkward smile. Victor didn't bother pretending. Neither extended a hand. Adrian looked at each of them calmly. Years earlier, he would have defended himself. Today, he saw no point. Some people confused silence with weakness because they had never experienced true strength. Damien's smile slowly faded. He wanted anger. He wanted an argument. Instead, Adrian simply watched him. The silence became uncomfortable. Damien cleared his throat. So tell me, he asked sarcastically, how's retirement? I stay busy. Making rocking chairs? Among other things, Damien laughed again. I manage companies worth hundreds of millions. Adrian answered quietly. I'm happy for you. The response caught Damien off guard. There was no jealousy, no bitterness, only sincerity. It irritated him. Before he could continue, a heavy oak door opened. A tall man in his 60s stepped into the waiting room. Silver hair framed a serious face marked by years of discipline rather than age. His posture alone commanded respect. Good morning. His voice was calm but firm. I'm Graham Whitmore. His eyes moved across the room before stopping on Adrian. Mr. Mercer? He inclined his head respectfully. Thank you for coming. Then he turned toward Damien. Mr. Mercer. The greeting was polite, but noticeably colder. Damien seemed to notice the difference. So, Damien said impatiently, shall we get this over with? Whitmore ignored the tone. Please follow me. The conference room overlooked the Manhattan skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. At its center stood a long mahogany table polished to perfection. Everyone took their seats. Damien positioned himself at the head of the table as though inheriting a throne. Claire sat beside him. Victor opened a leather notebook, ready to discuss assets before hearing a single word. Adrian quietly chose the chair nearest the door. Whitmore remained standing. He placed a thick leather folder on the table. The room instantly fell silent. Ladies and gentlemen, he began. This document contains the final wishes of Mrs. Vivian Mercer, signed 3 months before her passing. He opened the folder carefully. His reading began with several charitable donations. $50,000 to her longtime housekeeper. $100,000 to a wildlife conservation foundation. Additional gifts to loyal employees who had served her company faithfully. Damien sighed dramatically. Claire checked her phone. Victor glanced impatiently at his watch. Their reactions did not escape Whitmore's attention. He calmly continued reading every single line exactly as written. Finally, Damien interrupted. Mr. Whitmore. The lawyer looked up. Can we skip all of this? No. My mother's estate is enormous. I am aware. So let's move to the important section. Whitmore slowly removed his reading glasses. His expression hardened. Mr. Mercer. His voice became colder than before. This is not a negotiation. Damien's confident smile disappeared. I will read every word your mother instructed me to read. Silence filled the room. You will remain seated. Another pause. And you will listen. For the first time since arriving, Damien looked genuinely uncomfortable. Without another word, Graham Whitmore adjusted his glasses, turned the next page, and quietly announced, Now we arrive at the section concerning Mrs. Mercer's immediate family. Every person at the table instinctively leaned forward. The real reading was finally about to begin. The atmosphere inside the conference room grew heavier with every passing second. Damian Mercer sat confidently at the head of the polished mahogany table, convinced the fortune his mother had built was only minutes away from becoming entirely his. Claire Bennett wore a satisfied smile, while Victor Sloan rested both hands on his leather portfolio, already imagining future investment strategies. Across the room, Adrian Mercer remained silent. His hands rested comfortably on the table, his expression calm despite the tension surrounding him. Attorney Graham Whitmore turned another page of the will before speaking again. Article 7 concerns the immediate distribution of Mrs. Vivian Mercer's personal assets. Damian leaned forward, finally. This was the moment he had been waiting for. Whitmore continued reading. To my son Damian Mercer, I leave my Park Avenue penthouse. A broad smile spread across Damian's face. Claire squeezed his arm excitedly. Victor nodded with visible satisfaction. Damian looked across the table toward Adrian. Did you hear that? Adrian simply looked back without replying. Whitmore continued. I also leave my complete collection of luxury watches. Damian laughed. Now we're getting somewhere. Claire whispered, Congratulations. Victor smiled. I knew she'd never disappoint you. Damian leaned back proudly. This is exactly how it should be. Whitmore raised one hand. There is an additional instruction. The room became quiet again. The watch collection remains secured inside the private vault located within the penthouse. Damian nodded impatiently. Fine. The vault may only be opened with a single physical key. So, Whitmore slowly lifted his eyes from the document. That key has been entrusted to Adrian Mercer. Silence. Complete silence. Even the faint hum of the building's air conditioning suddenly seemed loud. Damian blinked. His confident smile disappeared. What? Whitmore repeated the sentence without changing his tone. The only key to the vault was placed into the care of Mr. Adrian Mercer. Damian stared at his father, then back at the lawyer. That's impossible. It is clearly stated in the will. There has to be some mistake. There is none. Damian pushed his chair backward and stood. My father hasn't seen my mother in 20 years. Whitmore remained seated. That fact is irrelevant. He doesn't know where she lived. Also irrelevant. He has no business touching anything that belongs to this family. Whitmore closed the folder for a brief moment. Mrs. Mercer anticipated that objection. Damian frowned. What objection? Yours? The lawyer opened another envelope, resting beside the will. It contains personal instructions. He unfolded the handwritten page carefully. The key shall remain in Adrian Mercer's possession until every condition described in this document has been fulfilled. Claire frowned. What conditions? Whitmore ignored her question and continued reading. If my son attempts to pressure, threaten, manipulate, or insult Adrian regarding the key, he immediately forfeits all authority over my private collection until the executor decides otherwise. Damian's face turned bright red. This is ridiculous. Whitmore calmly folded the page. Those are your mother's exact words. Victor leaned toward Damian. Stay calm. I'm perfectly calm. His raised voice suggested otherwise. Claire crossed her arms. Why would she trust him? Adrian finally spoke. I don't know. Everyone looked toward him. He genuinely appeared confused. I wasn't given a key. Whitmore nodded. I expected you to say that. The lawyer reached beneath the table and placed a small wooden box before Adrian. Its polished walnut surface immediately caught his attention. He recognized the craftsmanship, not because he had seen it before, because he had built it himself more than 20 years earlier. Adrian stared at it in disbelief. This... His voice almost disappeared. I made this. Whitmore smiled faintly. Mrs. Mercer instructed me to deliver it directly into your hands. Adrian carefully lifted the lid. Inside rested an old brass key. Beneath it lay a folded handwritten note. His fingers trembled slightly. The handwriting belonged unmistakably to Vivian. For a long moment, he simply looked at it. Memories flooded back, long nights, shared dreams, the years before ambition and resentment destroyed everything they had built together. Whitmore quietly spoke. The note is addressed only to Mr. Adrian Mercer. Damien slammed both hands onto the table. No! Everyone turned toward him. No private messages. Whitmore's expression hardened. Your mother specifically requested that no one except Mr. Mercer read it. Damien laughed bitterly. This is unbelievable. It is legally binding. I want to see that letter. You cannot. I'll challenge the will. That is your legal right, Whitmore spoke with complete confidence. But the letter remains private. Damien glared across the table. You planned this. Adrian looked genuinely puzzled. I didn't. Liar. I've never seen this box since the day I built it, Whitmore interrupted. Mr. Mercer, Damien stopped speaking. If you continue disrupting these proceedings, I will suspend today's reading until a judge orders otherwise. Victor immediately whispered, Sit down. Damien hesitated. His breathing remained heavy. Finally, he lowered himself back into his chair. Claire looked less confident than before. Victor no longer smiled. For the first time that morning, uncertainty had entered the room. Adrian carefully slipped the unopened note into his inside jacket pocket. He wrapped his fingers around the old brass key. It felt strangely familiar, as though the past itself had been waiting for him all these years. He had arrived expecting humiliation. Instead, he had become the center of a mystery that even his son could not explain. And deep inside, Adrian realized this was only the beginning. Vivian Mercer hadn't simply written a will. She had designed something far more complicated. Something that none of them yet understood. No one spoke for several seconds. The silence surrounding the conference table felt heavier than any argument. Adrian Mercer continued staring at the small walnut box resting before him. He gently traced his fingertips across the polished lid. Every smooth edge reminded him of a younger version of himself. A man who had built furniture for the woman he loved instead of courtrooms filled with regret. He slipped the brass key into his jacket pocket beside the folded letter. Damien watched every movement. I want to know what's written on that note, he demanded. It isn't addressed to you, Graham Whitmore replied evenly. My mother never kept secrets from me. The lawyer looked directly into his eyes. I believe today's proceedings suggest otherwise. Claire lowered her gaze. Victor shifted uneasily in his chair. Damien's confidence was beginning to crack. Whitmore returned his attention to the will. Article 8. He paused before continuing. This section explains why Mr. Adrian Mercer was entrusted with the key. Damien folded his arms. This should be interesting. Whitmore began reading. If Adrian is present today, it means he chose dignity over pride. I knew he would come because unanswered questions always mattered more to him than wounded feelings. Adrian lowered his eyes. Those words sounded exactly like Vivian. She had always understood him even when she refused to admit it. Whitmore continued. Many people believed Adrian walked away from our marriage because he lacked ambition. Damien smirked. Exactly. The lawyer ignored him. That story was convenient. It was also false. The room grew still again. Victor frowned. Claire slowly looked toward Adrian. Damien's smile disappeared. Whitmore turned another page. The truth behind our divorce has remained hidden for 20 years because I demanded that it remain hidden. Damien interrupted. What truth? Whitmore answered without emotion. Allow me to finish. He resumed reading. Adrian protected something far more valuable than his reputation. He carried a burden that never belonged to him. Adrian felt his heartbeat quicken. He had not expected this, not today, not ever. Whitmore looked toward Adrian before continuing. If you are hearing these words, Adrian, then I owe you an apology I was never brave enough to give while I was alive. Adrian closed his eyes briefly. The conference room disappeared. For a moment he remembered Vivian standing beside him in their first apartment, laughing over cheap takeout while they dreamed about building a future together. That woman had vanished long before the divorce, yet somehow her voice still lived inside these pages. Whitmore continued. You kept your promise even after I broke mine. Damien leaned forward. What promise? No one answered. You accepted blame that should have destroyed me instead. Victor exchanged a confused glance with Claire. Damien shook his head. This makes no sense. Whitmore calmly continued. Every newspaper called Adrian is selfish. Every television interview praised me for surviving betrayal. Adrian's jaw tightened. He remembered every headline, every accusation, every interview where he remained silent. Because silence had been the price of protecting Vivian. He never corrected anyone. He never defended himself. He never revealed the truth because he gave me his word. Claire slowly whispered, Is that true? Adrian remained silent. Whitmore continued reading. People often mistake silence for guilt. Sometimes silence is the greatest sacrifice a person can make. Damien's breathing became heavier. No, his voice barely escaped. No, she wouldn't write this. Whitmore looked directly at him. These are your mother's own words. Damien pushed back from the table. She's confused. She was mentally competent when she signed this document. My mother loved me. I'm certain she did. Then why is she defending him? Whitmore answered quietly. Perhaps because she believed it was finally time. The room became silent once again. Adrian slowly reached inside his jacket and removed the folded letter Vivian had written only for him. He hesitated. He remembered Whitmore's instructions. It was private. Yet every person in that room stared at it as though it contained the answer to 2 decades of unanswered questions. Whitmore nodded gently. You may read it whenever you choose. Adrian unfolded the paper. Vivian's elegant handwriting filled the page. He silently read the opening line. Adrian, if you're reading this, then I waited far too long to say the words you deserve to hear. His vision blurred. He continued reading quietly. Every sentence felt heavier than the last. She admitted regret. She admitted fear. She admitted allowing ambition to destroy the family they once built together, most painfully of all. She admitted that Adrian had never betrayed her. He folded the letter carefully before anyone could see the remaining pages. Damien stood frozen. What did she say? Adrian looked across the table. His voice remained calm. It was meant for me. What did she write? I won't dishonor her final wish. Damien slammed his fist against the polished table. This is insane. Whitmore calmly closed the will. We will take a 10-minute recess. He stood. I suggest everyone use that time wisely. The lawyer walked toward the windows. Claire remained seated in stunned silence. Victor stared blankly at the table, his confidence completely gone. Damien paced across the room like a trapped animal. Meanwhile, Adrian quietly slipped Vivian's letter back into his pocket. For 20 years, he had carried the weight of being remembered as the villain. Now, for the first time, the woman who knew the entire truth had finally begun telling it herself. and Adrian sensed that the greatest revelation was still waiting inside the remaining pages of the will. 10 minutes later, everyone returned to the conference room. The atmosphere had completely changed. Damian Mercer no longer looked like a man celebrating an inheritance. His expensive suit could not hide the uncertainty on his face. Claire avoided eye contact with everyone while Victor sat unusually quiet, no longer wearing his confident smile. Only Adrian Mercer appeared. Graham Whitmore resumed his seat and opened the final section of Vivian Mercer's will. We will now conclude the reading. Every eye focused on him. Whitmore adjusted his glasses before speaking. Article 9. His calm voice echoed through the room. Everything that follows concerns the remainder of my estate. Damian leaned forward once again. Despite everything that had happened, he still believed the fortune would become his. Whitmore continued. My company, Mercer Design Group, my investment portfolio, my commercial properties, and every remaining financial asset shall be transferred into the Mercer Family Trust. Damian smiled again. There it is. Whitmore raised one finger. There are conditions. Damian's smile disappeared. My son, Damian Mercer, shall not receive direct ownership of these assets immediately. His face turned pale. What? Whitmore calmly continued. For 20 years, I believed wealth would protect my son. Instead, I watched wealth become his greatest weakness. Claire lowered her head. Victor slowly closed his notebook. Money rewarded his pride instead of his character. Damian whispered, No. Therefore, my estate shall remain protected by the Mercer Family Trust until Damian proves he deserves the responsibility that accompanies it. Damian pushed back his chair. This is absurd. Whitmore ignored him. The sole trustee and temporary guardian of the Mercer Family Trust shall be Adrian Mercer. The room froze. Even Adrian looked genuinely shocked. Whitmore repeated the sentence. Mr. Adrian Mercer has been appointed sole trustee. Damian exploded. Absolutely not, his voice thundered across the conference room. You can't give him my inheritance. Whitmore remained perfectly calm. It is no longer your mother's property. It's mine. No. The lawyer met his eyes without hesitation. It belongs to the trust. Damian's breathing became ragged. You planned this. No. You convinced her. No. You manipulated her. Whitmore closed the will. Your mother made every decision personally. Damian looked toward Adrian. You knew? Adrian slowly shook his head. I learned everything today. Liar. I've spent 20 years believing she hated me. For the first time, Adrian's voice carried emotion. I expected to leave here with nothing. Silence settled over the room. Whitmore opened one final sealed envelope. There is one last statement. Everyone remained seated. Damian, Whitmore's voice softened slightly. If you are angry, then direct your anger toward me. Adrian sacrificed everything to protect our family. He lost his career. He lost his marriage. He lost his reputation. He even lost his son. Adrian lowered his head. Whitmore continued. I allowed the world to believe he abandoned us because admitting the truth would have destroyed everything he worked to protect. Claire quietly wiped away a tear. Victor stared at the table. Damian stood completely still. The greatest mistake of my life was allowing the man who loved us most to become the man everyone blamed. Adrian closed his eyes. 20 years of silence suddenly felt heavier than ever. If forgiveness is possible. Whitmore paused briefly before reading the final lines. Then I hope it begins today. Adrian, thank you for carrying a burden that belonged to both of us. Damian, before you inherit my wealth, learn why your father walked away. Only then will you understand what true success actually costs. Whitmore slowly closed the leather folder. The will has now been fully executed. No one moved. The silence inside the room seemed endless. Damien stared at his father. For the first time in 20 years, he looked beyond the worn charcoal suit, beyond the weathered hands, beyond the quiet man he had spent years despising. He saw someone carrying invisible scars. His voice barely rose above a whisper. "Is it true?" Adrian looked at his son. "I made promises." "What promises?" "The kind that cost everything." Damien swallowed hard. "You never hated us?" Adrian smiled sadly. "I never stopped loving either of you." Those simple words shattered the wall Damien had spent 2 decades building around himself. His shoulders slowly dropped. The anger disappeared. Only regret remained. "I believed, he struggled to continue. "I believed every story." "I know. You never tried to defend yourself." Adrian nodded. "Some promises matter more than pride." Damien's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry." The words came quietly, awkwardly, but they were sincere. Adrian stood and walked toward his son. For a brief moment, neither man knew what to do. Then Damien stepped forward. Father and son embraced for the first time in 20 years. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. Some wounds could never be erased. Some years could never be returned. But forgiveness does not ask people to rewrite the past. It simply gives them permission to build a different future. Outside the conference room, Manhattan continued rushing through another ordinary day. Inside, however, one family finally escaped the prison that silence had built. Vivian Mercer's greatest inheritance had never been the millions she accumulated. It was the truth she finally found the courage to leave behind. And for Adrian Mercer, that truth was worth far more than any fortune money could ever buy.